Welcome back to Zestology. This is the podcast all about energy, vitality and motivation. 90% of us, that means very likely you and me and almost everyone you know, are breathing incorrectly. Whoa. And this failure to breathe correctly is potentially causing or aggravating a laundry list of chronic illnesses. So we're going to look into that today on Zestology, and then some things that can help as well. Why are we breathing incorrectly? What do we need to do about it? Surely breathing is breathing. Surely there's nothing wrong with that. Well, one of the things we look at in this podcast is we should shut our mouth while breathing. And mouth breathing is terrible. We should exhale for longer. We should avoid overly soft food. We should all engage in nose singing and maybe a bit of mouth taping and loads more. Yes, podcast that features mouth taping. How exciting is that? Investigative writer James Nestor has written a scientific adventure into the lost art and science of breathing. I've actually got the... Just lift my coffee cup. I've got his book right here. It's a beautiful hardback tome, and with some excellent quotes on the back from very eminent writers and scientists and other people as well. But yeah, modern research is showing us that even when you make slight adjustments to the way that you inhale and the way that you breathe, can make massive difference. If you're an athlete, it can make massive difference to your times and your performance. And if you're like me, and a bit more of a laptop jockey who likes getting out and about, you'll also find that you can massively increase your performance. And more than that, James Nestor is just a cracking chap, a very engaging, laid-back interviewee that I very much enjoyed speaking to. So here he is, James Nestor on Zestology.
I had a very strange experience a number of years ago when I was asked by my doctor to visit a breathing class because I was having a number of respiratory problems. I kept getting mild pneumonia, bronchitis, and wheezing. Even though I was pretty fit, I was working out all the time, I just kept having all these breathing problems. So I went to this class where they were doing this vigorous pranayama, which is this really intense breathing technique. And I sweated through my socks, and there were sweat blotches on my jeans. My hair was sopping wet after about 10 minutes of just sitting in a chilly room, cross-legged and breathing. And I thought, wow, this was a very interesting experience. So I asked my doctor, I said, what happened? And she said, oh, you must have had a fever, or the heat must have been up in the room. So she had zero explanation for what happened. But you know, I'm a journalist. I write about science, and my one experience I didn't think merited any real research into the subject until I discovered free divers. And these are people who are able to dive on a single breath for 300, 400 feet, stay underwater 8, 9, 10 minutes at a time. So they had mastered this other side of breathing, and they told me that mastering the power of breath extended beyond just diving deep and diving long. It had all these other applications. So it was at that point where I thought, wow, there's a much bigger story in this, and I was excited to pursue it.
I was reading that bit about you going to that class in the introduction, and that made me think that it would resonate with me, because one of the things that I find persistently happens is my circulation isn't very good. I get very cold hands and feet, especially in winter. And reading how you were kind of, you know, your circulation got a lot better and your heart rate got up and you started to sweat and all the rest of it. That made me think I could apply some of that. Is circulation one of the ways that if you get the breath right, and one of the things that you investigated, you can really make a difference?
Absolutely. You know, so much of blood pressure is correlated to how we breathe. And that includes, it extends to circulation. It extends what hormones are in your body at a certain time. It extends to digestion, mental state. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of things that are connected to how we breathe. And of course they are. This is our most basic biological function. So, but what I found was even in medical communities, people are just concerned that they're breathing. If they're breathing, that's great. They're alive. If they're not breathing, that's a serious problem. We need to get them breathing again. But what I've found is those nuances of the 25,000 breaths we take every day matter as much as what you're eating or how much you're exercising. It's that important. And it was interesting to go into this world and talk to these scientists and researchers who are finding scientific proof for so many wild claims from the past.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you come from a kind of a background of writing about science, because it's always nice if there's something kind of concrete to back everything up, that it's not just a kind of woo-woo, look, you do this for an hour and you'll feel so much better. I like a bit of evidence.
Yeah, there's so many books on how to breathe right. You know, you could go to a library and there's dozens and dozens of books, and some of these extend, they're thousands of years old. So the how of it's easy, but what I didn't find is the why and the what and where this stuff came from. And, someone's personal experience is okay, but I have no interest in writing a spiritual memoir. I wanted to understand this from the inside so that other people reading the book could also understand what was happening to their own bodies. If they're using breath to get healthier, for athletic endurance, or if they're sick and they have respiratory problems, and where those problems came from and how to fix them. So it seemed like there was this huge gap in medical literature where they're just looking at pathologies. I'm not pointing fingers. If I break my leg, I'm not going to breathe. I'm going to go to the hospital, get it fixed. But they're looking at pathologies. But there's this whole other side that so many other people have been looking at, and especially lately, of using breathing for preventative maintenance and using breathing to alter different mental states, access energy. And that's where I found this to be very, very interesting.
Well, we'll come on to the journey that you undertook in your investigation of breath in just a second. But I want you to be honest now, James. But going back to that first pranayama class, was there a little part of your brain that was thinking, tell you what, there could be a good book in this?
I will be totally honest with you, and I would say otherwise. That was not what I was thinking.
Okay.
I was freaked out by it. The teacher came up to me, and she was a little woo-woo. Said, "Oh, it's prana, it's energy." Like, none of it made any sense to me. I rode my bike home for 3 miles, in sweat-soaked jeans. Not too nice. But there's a lot of memoirs and personal experience books, and some of those are great, but that's not what I do, and that's not what I've ever been interested in doing. So I really shelved it away. But those free divers, once you see other people applying this, people who were just like me and you and everyone else, there were tall people, short people, large people, skinny people, and they had honed breathing to do something that was scientifically impossible. We've been told by scientists, you can't go deeper than 100 feet. You can't hold your breath that long. They were doing it every day. So that really opened the door for me.
So I know from what little of your book I've read so far, I can tell that you're very good at spinning a good tale. And you've travelled to secret Soviet facilities and ancient burial sites, and you went to Brazil and all sorts of places. What did you find on this journey?
I found that there is a huge gap in our understanding of how breathing works and the true potential of it. And this extends not just from the general public but to medical communities. My father-in-law is a pulmonologist, and he hadn't heard about 80% of the stuff that I was bringing up to him.
Wow.
And he was absolutely flummoxed. He's like, this is so basic. It all makes perfect sense. Because the studies, I don't send him the willy-nilly stuff. I send him the stuff from Stanford or Harvard or, top institutions. And he hadn't heard any of it. And so he was a great foil, because he would call immediate BS on some stuff. And then he would say, wow, there's something really powerful here. So, the point to go to all these different places is, my job as a journalist is to objectively review science and stories, and to get rid of all the chaff, and to try to come out with a real non-slanted story of a subject. I had no slant coming in here, because there's no benefit for me to say this breathing system works, but this one doesn't. Don't do that. I looked at the science. I was lucky enough to talk to the experts in the field, the people who are doing all these studies, and they really set me straight.
So, to tell us about what you found then, what are we doing wrong, what are we doing wrong, and how can we change it?
I think the first thing that really shocked me is I always thought that people who breathed incorrectly, like if you think about someone with anxiety or panic or asthma, right? They're obviously breathing incorrectly. They're up into the chest, breathing too much. But what I learned was that we all have an anatomical disadvantage right now to breathing correctly. And this was wrought from industrial foods about 500 years ago. Our faces have changed so much, so quickly, that our teeth no longer fit in our mouths. And when I was talking to a biological anthropologist about this, she said, why is that? You look at any other animal in the wild, perfectly straight teeth. You look at any old human skull, an ancient skull from 1,000 years old, 10,000 years old, 100,000 years old, perfectly straight teeth. So why is that? Because our mouths have grown too small. And guess what happens when we have too small of a mouth? We have a smaller airway. And when we have a smaller airway, we are much more apt to have respiratory problems like sleep apnea, snoring, asthma, on and on and on. And this blew my mind because I'd never heard this before. You know, I'd always learned that evolution is this great path forward, survival of the fittest, which is completely wrong. Evolution means change, and animals and different life forms change for better or for worse. And we are, at least in regards to breathing, changing much more for the worst right now.
Okay, so is that because we're not foraging so much, we're not kind of chewing so much, our diets have changed, that our mouths have changed?
Absolutely right. Yeah. It almost extends almost entirely to chewing stress. And they've done these studies where they've taken infants and looked at the ones who had been breastfed for 2 years and looked at the ones who had been bottle fed instead. And without that chewing stress of breastfeeding, of pulling the mouth outward, those kids who were bottle fed are much more apt to have sleep apnea, snoring, respiratory problems. Just from that. So it starts at infancy. Wow. And then when you're a kid, if the only thing you're eating is soft stuff, which is the only thing we eat in the modern world. I mean, think about what you ate today. It's all soft. You're not using the muscles in your face. You're not building the bones in your face. And so your face is going to grow flatter and your mouth is going to grow smaller, which is going to make your sinus cavity smaller, all these other problems. So it's a simple matter of physics, you know, and I've looked at dozens and dozens of skulls with the people who study this stuff. And it's amazing to see these skulls 1,000 years old. These people have these huge jaws. They never had their wisdom teeth extracted, right? They never had braces, perfect teeth, and these huge nasal apertures, much larger sinuses. So we're shrinking, and it's causing a massive problems. And this was a story going into this book and this research I had no idea I was going to stumble upon, and it still fascinates me.
Wow. So you found that out. What else did you find?
I found... what are you looking for? Do you want breathing methods, or what else has happened to the human skull specifically? Or
I suppose if we aren't breathing correctly, is it simply because of our teeth not fitting into our mouths in the right way? Is it because of evolution? Is there anything else going into why we are not breathing in the right way? And just by the way, James, your microphone a couple of moments ago just cut out a couple of times. I think it might.
Oh,
have
no,
been,
I'm sorry.
It might have been because of the way that you're breathing, but
Uh-oh. I will try to. I'm going to step back from it a little bit. Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's fine. It's very brief.
Always something. Okay. So, anxiety and psychological problems play into breathing as well. So anxious people with asthma, other people with respiratory problems are going to be breathing oftentimes too much. We know that because their exhaled carbon dioxide levels are very low. So that is a sign that you're breathing too much. And if you look at any anxious person, that's how they breathe. Also, it has to do with mouth breathing. So many of us, from 25 to 50% of us, breathe through our mouths. And this is really, really bad news. The reason is because the nose humidifies air, it heats air, it conditions air, it gets it right up to the temperature of our bodies before it enters our lungs, which makes this air so much easier for our lungs to process and extract oxygen from. When we breathe through the mouths, we don't get any of those benefits. So I think it's the combination. These are anxious times. We're mouth breathers. We've got evolutionary problems in our face. And all those are this perfect storm that has, I say in the book, we become the worst breathers in the animal kingdom. And I truly believe that. You know, some bulldogs are pretty close to us. But these are dogs that have been interbred to such a degree that they have completely flat faces, small sinuses, which in many ways is a great analog for our own species. We have flat faces, small sinuses, and we're struggling to breathe right along with them.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's actually come at a very good time chatting to you, because I've over the last couple of weeks I've been doing this Qigong course. I've wanted to do one for years, but I've never been able to commit to kind of 6 evenings in a row, because I tend to work a lot of evenings here in the UK. So it's just an hour a day for a week. And it is a practice that massively resonates with me, and I love it. And my mind is in a very different place after I do it. And I've been trying to work out why. And what I've kind of decided on is, and this is before I kind of spoke to you, I think it probably is the breath. The breath is so deliberate and so precisely part of the movements that I think whatever I've been doing up to that moment before I do that Qigong class, I'm just kind of breathing normally, but then I'm massively taking in more oxygen and doing it in a kind of very deliberate way, in a very deliberate form that has been honed over centuries. I just wondered if you'd looked at kind of Qigong or ancient practices like that at all.
Absolutely. And what I found is so many of these practices didn't matter if it originated in ancient China, didn't matter if it originated in ancient India or Japan or ancient Greece. They were all doing the same thing. So almost any meditation practice is going to have you slow down and focus on your breath and breathe slowly and deeper breaths. So there's a reason they were doing this. So it's not just a psychological thing that happens to you when you focus this way. There's a physiological complete shift in your body when you breathe these slow, low, and deep breaths. So what happens is your circulation increases, blood flow is going to increase to your brain, and the systems of your body are going to enter into synchrony in that the heart, the burden on the heart is going to significantly decrease, because when you take these low breaths, every time you inhale, you are pulling blood from the body into the thoracic cavity. When you exhale, that blood is pushed back out. So your diaphragm is actually a second heart, and it controls so much of blood pressure. So by lessening the burden on these systems of the body, everything works at peak efficiency, which is what you want. You don't want to tax your body to have to constantly compensate for poor breathing. You want to breathe in a healthy way so your body can do what it's naturally designed to do, which is to do more with less air. And it's also interesting to note, beyond like pranayamas, which have a very specific purpose, these breathing practices of being very slow are having you bring in less air. And by bringing in less air, you will actually be delivering more oxygen more easily throughout your body. This is such a contrarian concept. It takes people a long time to get their head around. It took me months and months and months to figure this out, and talking to experts, have them explain it to me. But it's true. So with breathing, almost all the time, less equals more.
Wow. Interrupting this podcast for one moment to remind you that it is brought to you by the magnificent Magnesium Breakthrough. If there's one mineral you should be worried about not getting enough of, it is magnesium. Magnesium's the body's master mineral. It's powerful in over 300 critical reactions, including detox, fat metabolism, energy, even digestion. And I, for one, have been taking it for years at night to help me sleep. In fact, if I don't take magnesium, or if I've run out, or if I go on holiday and I forget it or something like that, it's a disaster. I mean, I've really come to rely on it at night. And there's two big problems because magnesium's been largely missing from US soil since the 1950s. So we don't really get it in our food the way that we should. And most supplements only contain 1 or 2 forms of magnesium. And that is why I'm excited that I've partnered up in July with Magnesium Breakthrough. I'm taking this myself at the moment, and it's great. It's already sold out a few times through the company that makes it, Bioptimizers. And I'm very excited because it's now back in stock. All 7 forms of this mineral of magnesium are in Magnesium Breakthrough. And if you're in the UK, you can go to bioptimizers.co.uk and use the code Zestology10. That is BIOPTIMIZ.ERS.co.uk. Use the code Zestology10. Magnesium Breakthrough is the most effective magnesium supplement you're going to find that I've ever tried, certainly. Say goodbye to having to get 7 different bottles of magnesium as well. If you're in North America, go to magbreakthrough.com/zestology. You will use the code Zestology10 there as well and save up to 40% off select packages. So get on the old magnesium train and enjoy, and let me know how you feel. Back to the show. Talk to me a little bit more about soft food then. Should we actually be avoiding overly soft food?
Oh, I think it's impossible to avoid that in this day and age. But what you can do is there are different practices you can do, pushing the tongue up to the roof of the mouth. These practices have been shown in various studies to have a huge impact of reducing snoring and sleep apnea just by doing these practices. Because the way the throat and the mouth works is it wants to be exercised, right? But we're not exercising it. So the tissues at the back of the throat become very flabby, just like anything else on your body. But the more that we exercise them, the more tone they're going to get, and the easier it is to breathe. So you can chew, hard foods all day. That would be great. But I've found that these tongue thrusting exercises, these other exercises, can be very beneficial and not require you to spend 2 hours a day in the kitchen trying to figure out your raw keto food diet. So that's definitely something you can do. There's surgical interventions too. And it's so fascinating to me that there are a bunch of orthodontists right now that their specialty is returning your mouth to the size it was supposed to be before industrialization. So we're looking back 500 years to how we should actually be looking and how we should be functioning, because we're so messed up right now, which I think is ironic, but also quite poignant, right? We had something figured out over those millions of years of living naturally, and we've seemed to really lost touch with it lately.
Wow, yeah. Tongue thrusting sounds quite interesting.
There's a practice, and I can share this study. I was just reading it this morning, actually. I'm not going to put you through the motions. I'm not a breathing therapist. I don't do this stuff, but I'd be more than happy to share what the experts are saying about this. But it's one of the most cited papers of the last couple of years. And it was done by real researchers. So what it's basically doing is just creating more stress in your face, because what happens if you take your hands right now and place them on your skull, you're going to feel all these ridges and cracks in your skull, right? Those are sutures. And if your hands are clean, you can also place a thumb inside the upper palate of your mouth, and you're going to feel a little crack in that upper palate. That's also a suture. Okay. So at almost any time in our life, we can expand that suture. And this is something people don't get. They think that after 30, we cannot build and model bone in our body. We can heal bone, but we can't model new bone. But that is false. There's one bone that we can model. Guess where it is? It's right in the middle of our face. So I did an experiment in the book where I was talking to the expert who's been doing this for 30 years. And still I was like, yeah, but this goes against any textbook that you pick up. It goes against anything I've ever learned. And he said, okay, well, why don't you wear this device? So it was a device that fit on the roof of my mouth, and I wore it at night, and it very gently spread apart that palate. I know that sounds dangerous, but this is what our bodies are doing all the time. This was just a little helping hand. And so by gently spreading apart that palate and by chewing, you're stimulating stem cells. By stimulating those stem cells, you are growing new bone. So my palate has expanded, and because of that, my breathing has greatly improved. And we have CAT scans of this.
Wow.
And I grew bone in my face. I'm well past 30, but I grew bone in my face. I grew about 5 pennies worth of bone in my face. And what he was saying, a lot of people are attracted to this because as we grow older, we lose bone, right? And that bone we're losing in our face means that the flesh in our face has nowhere to go but down, has less to glom onto. So if you're able to maintain that bone or even build it, you're able to, a lot of his clients want to look younger naturally, and this is how they're doing it. I don't get too much into the aesthetics in the book. I wasn't interested in it. I was interested in the breathing aspect and the airway aspect, and it all checks out.
Well, I mean, if there's an aesthetic aspect to it as well, then it's even more appealing, isn't it? What was that device? Is that something that's kind of commonly available?
There's tons of them out there. The one I used was a homeo block, but there's several out there, and there's a lot of procedures. You know what they're doing now is orthodontists are doing now is they're doing a very quick procedure in which they expand that palate over a number of weeks or a number of months, and they're using this for people who have airway problems, who have sleep apnea, who have snoring problems. It's really effective. What I found what's so interesting, which is why I called the book, The New Science of a Lost Art, is the first functional orthodontics 120, 30 years ago. They were designed to open up that palate to help breathing. That's how it started. For these kids who had cleft palate, they couldn't breathe, they couldn't chew, so they built this device to expand their mouths. They found, wow, if we can expand their mouths and make their breathing better, we can create a wider mouth to make teeth grow in straight. So these were the first orthodontics, and they completely went away in the 40s as we found a quicker and cheaper way of doing it, which is braces and headgear. And it's so interesting to me to think that, this 100-year-old technology is now having this enormous resurgence. So many orthodontists are pursuing this because they know the effects.
Wow. Well, the homeo block, I've just had a look at that online while we were chatting. Looks pretty good. What about something that quite a few people who listen to this podcast do, and a lot of people in the, quote, biohacking community do, is they use mouth taping at night. And it's something that I've never done, but a lot of people swear by it. Is that something, it sounds so weird, doesn't it? Is it something that you'd looked into?
So this sounded very strange and suspicious to me as well, until I talked to a Stanford breathing therapist who used it to cure her own mouth breathing and to open her nose entirely. And until I talked to another doctor who used it for kids who were suffering from ADHD. And I know that sounds super sketchy, like this guy should be fired. But it turns out that ADHD, which is rampant right now, is directly tied to breathing. And it's directly tied to sleep apnea and obstructions in the airway, directly. So they've found that these kids who have had their breathing improve, who have used different devices to open their airway, so many of them no longer have the symptoms of ADHD. It's gone. And if you think about it, especially for a developing mind, if you are not getting enough oxygen all the time, you're in trouble. You're not going to grow right. Your brain's not going to function right, which is exactly what's happened to these kids. And it's so sad. So there's a whole new science, and they're studying this at Stanford. They're studying it all over the place of airway health. It starts there. Everything else can come after that, but it starts with being able to breathe easily. So it's a long way of saying this mouth taping stuff seems super suspicious till I heard it from these people and until I enlisted in a Stanford experiment for 20 days where I had silicone plugs up my nose, me and another subject, for 10 days, and we analyzed what happened to us just breathing through our mouths, and then we breathed just through our nose, and we used mouth tape for that time. And it was such a huge difference, not only in how we felt, but how we slept, that I was convinced this is the thing to do. And since that study, which was about a year and a half ago, I use this stuff every night. My wife mocks me I don't care. I absolutely swear by it, because
Wow.
she's got a much better developed jaw than me. She doesn't need it. But if you're one of those people who wakes up every night with a dry mouth, or you need to urinate throughout the night, that's because you're not entering into states of deep sleep. So by closing your mouth, you are getting 20% more oxygen just by breathing through your nose. And that has a huge difference, especially at night. So it's a long way of saying you have to do it. If you're going to do it, rather, I will correct myself. You have to do it right. Don't use a fat strip of duct tape. Don't go on YouTube. Don't go on the internet. All you need is the teeniest piece of tape, about the size of a postage stamp, in the middle of your lips. It's fine if you can breathe out of the sides of your mouth, because the point of this is to train your mouth to be closed at night. And that's it. It's free. It's open to anyone.
Do you pee less in the night?
So
that's
I
quite,
do. I know that's a weird frame. Like I realized when I said that, I said, "Oh my God, I'm going to have to open this up." So I'll do this in a very brief way. When you do not enter deep stages of sleep, your body does not secrete enough vasopressin. And vasopressin is a hormone that allows us to store water at night. So the reason why animals don't, you look at your dog, or my dog will sleep 10 hours, no problem. She's in very deep sleep because she's releasing this vasopressin. If you have sleep apnea, or if you're snoring, you're constantly waking yourself up, especially with sleep apnea, because you're struggling to breathe. Your oxygen levels go, down to 85 or even below that, and you wake up. And you do it again. So we have recordings of us doing this, and it was the most frightening. It sounds like two men being strangled to death, which is exactly what happened when we were mouth breathing. We were being strangled to death on our own bodies. So, that vasopressin release, which happens in deep sleep, you're able to store more water. So I'm not using myself as proof of vasopressin release, nasal breathing, and proof I didn't do it. We didn't check our blood every morning. But that's the science behind it, and this is standard stuff, and it's inarguable. So you want to be able to go into deep sleep. You want those hormones to release, and nasal breathing is, at least for me, has been a wonderful way of doing that and waking up much more refreshed.
Yeah. And then with everything going on at the moment with the pandemic, interesting time for you to be bringing out a book. And I wonder how you've applied your thinking around what you've learnt around breath to everything that's happened over the last few months. Obviously, it seems like a lot of the very serious issues that have arisen from COVID-19 happen in the lungs. So I thought it'd be worth asking, and it might be that you haven't concluded very much, or it might be that you've concluded a whole lot.
Yeah, that's a good question. And, when I began this project years ago, my friends asked me, they're like, "You're writing a book about breath?" I breathe every day. I know how to breathe. Yeah. But again, it's the nuances of how we breathe, and that is becoming very apparent right now. So your respiratory health and your lung capacity will absolutely affect how well you're going to be getting over the symptoms of COVID, should you get it. And the Nobel Prize winner, Luis Ignarro, has mentioned that when we breathe through our noses, we're getting this huge profusion of nitric oxide. This is this incredible molecule that fights off pathogens, bacteria, and viruses. And he believes that nitric oxide could be a way of defending us against this flu. I'm not going to go out and say, breathe through your nose, you won't get COVID. Yeah. No. I'm saying it can only help you in defending yourself and keeping you stronger. And it's interesting to me, again, here's some more of the new science of a lost art, that they're now using nitric oxide to treat patients with COVID. So because it is so effective at opening up the lungs and fighting off this foul flu. But what's interesting, again, is that we create our own nitric oxide by nasal breathing. And if we hum, we can increase our nitric oxide 15-fold. So I think you're going to annoy whoever's in the house with you or whoever's in the park if you're humming, but it can only have a benefit. And one last thing I'll say, because I got this question before, is, just a few weeks ago in hospitals, my brother-in-law is an ER doctor. They used to take in patients with COVID and lie them on their backs and sometimes intubate them. And now they've found that's an awful thing to do, because when you breathe in, you're not only puffing up your chest, most of the lung expansion happens in your back. So if you're sleeping on your back, you're not able to get those full breaths in. So they've found that by simply setting patients up in a chair, having them breathe that way, or having them sleep on their side has a huge effect. And I found it interesting that cardiologists 70 years ago found this exact same thing. He would tape tennis balls on the backs of his patients with pneumonia to keep them from sleeping on their back. And then 2,000 years ago, Chinese doctors were saying that side sleeping is the way to go. So these patterns just keep repeating themselves over and over. And I think we're finding that with COVID right now.
Wow. Yeah. So the question I ask everybody on this podcast, I'm very interested to know, there's two questions. What is one book that you would recommend, given your long history as an author? And also, what is one tip that you would give for living with more energy and vitality?
I think the book, this is pretty cliched, but Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson, I think is a great reminder to continue pursuing your path. Even if people are trying to break you down, I think by really holding a steady path into what you believe in, you can really benefit other people as much by doing that. I just read that a couple months ago. I said, this guy was so clued in to how to do this thing. And
wow,
that book is 150 years old. So it's, and even better, it's freely available. You can download that anyway. First few pages aren't so hot, but stick with it, people. It gets better as it goes. So I think that the second thing, you're talking about energy, advice for maintaining energy and happiness. This is also going to sound very cliched, but you have to get your breathing in check, because no matter how much you exercise, no matter how keto or paleo or vegan you are, none of that matters unless you're breathing properly. And yes, I realize I have a bit of a slant here because I've been studying breathing for so long, but I had no idea going in how important this was. And now more than ever, and the best part about breathing, just like Self-Reliance by Emerson, it's free, it's open to everyone. You don't need Wi-Fi, don't need your phone. You need your nose and the will to do this. And the benefits can be very transformative, as I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of your book. It's a good, entertaining read as well. So thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. Your book is called Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art. And I think we're bringing out this podcast the week that it comes out. So it'll be available everywhere.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks to James, and thank you for listening as well. I don't know about you, but listening to podcasts like that makes me change my breathing instantly. Straight away, I was just breathing differently while I was speaking to him, and I still am. And I'm going to go and do some breath work of some description now as well. If you'd like more hacks, the stuff that I've been following, the stuff that's been working for me, stuff in the news that is related to zestology, then you can sign up for the 3 Zesty Things newsletter, which has taken on a world of its own and a life of its own recently, and is, even though he modestly says, I think it's getting pretty good actually. And you can go to TonyWrighton.com and sign up for that. And have a zesty week. I'll be back next time. See you then.